There was once a king of a province in Erin who had only one son. The king was very careful of the son, and sent him to school for good instruction. The other 3 kings of provinces in Erin had 3 sons at the same school, and 3 sent word by this one to his father that if he did not put his son to death, they would put both father and son to death themselves. When the young man came home with this word to his father and mother, they were grieved when they heard it. But the king's son said he would go out into the world to seek his fortune, and settle the trouble in that way. So away he went, taking with him only 5 pounds in money for his support. The young man travelled on till he came to a graveyard, where he saw 4 men fighting over a coffin. Then he went up to the 4 and saw that 2 of them were trying to put the coffin down into a grave, and the other 2 preventing them and keeping the coffin above the ground. When the king's son came near the men, he asked, "Why do you fight in such a place such as this? And why do you keep the coffin above the ground?" The 2 of the men answered and said, "The body of our brother is in this coffin, and these 2 men will not let us bury it." The other 2 then said, "We have a debt of 5 pounds on the dead man, and we will not let this body be buried till the debt is paid." The king's son said, "Let these men bury their brother, and I'll pay what you ask." Then the 2 let the brothers of the dead man bury him. The king's son paid the 5 pounds and went away empty-handed, and except the clothes on his back he had no more on the day he was born. After he had gone on his way a while, and the graveyard was out of sight, he turned and saw a sprightly red-haired man, Vir Reda, hurrying after him. When he came up, the stranger asked, "Don't you want a serving man?" "I do not," answered the king's son. "I have nothing to support myself with, let alone a serving man." "Well, never mind that," said the red-haired man. "I'll be with you wherever you go, whether you have anything or not." "What is your name?" asked the king's son. "Shaking Head," answered the red man. When they had gone a piece of the way together, the king's son stopped and asked, "Where shall we be tonight?" "We shall be in a giant's castle where there will be a small welcome for us," said Shaking Head. When evening came, they found themselves in front of a castle, and they went and saw no one inside, only a tall old hag. But they were not long in the place till they heard a loud rushing noise outside, and a blow on the castle. The giant came, and the first words that left his mouth were, "I'm glad to have an arrow knocked on my supper table to eat tonight." Then turning to the 2, he said, "What brought you here this evening? What do you want in my castle?" "All the champions and heroes of Erin are going to take your property from you and destroy yourself. We have come to warn you, and there is nobody to save you from them but us," said the Shaking Head. When the giant heard these words, he changed his treatment entirely. He gave the king's son and Shaking Head a hearty welcome and a kindly greeting. When he understood the news they brought, he washed them with tears of his eyes, dried them with kisses, and gave them a good supper and a soft bed that night. Next morning the giant was up at an early hour, and he went to the bedside of each man and told him to rise and have breakfast. Shaking Head asked his reward of the giant for telling him of the champions of Erin and the danger he was in. "Well," said the giant, "there's a pot of gold over there under my bed. Take as much of it as you wish, and welcome." "It isn't gold I want for my service," said the Shaking Head. "You have a gift which suits me better." "What gift is that?" asked the giant. "The light black steed in your stable." "That's a gift I will not give you," said the giant. "For when anyone comes to trouble or attack me, all I have to do is throw my leg over the steed, and away he carries me out of sight of every enemy." "Well," said Shaking Head, "if you do not give me that steed, I'll bring all the kingdom of Erin against you, and you'll be destroyed with all you have." The giant stopped a moment and said, "I believe you do that thing, so you may have the steed." Then Shaking Head took the steed out of the giant and gave him to the king's son, and away they went. At sunset, Shaking Head said, "We are near the castle of another giant, the next brother to the one who entertained us last night. He hasn't much welcome for us either, but he will treat us well when he is threatened." The second giant was going to eat the king's son for supper, but when Shaking Head told him about the forces of Erin, he changed his manner and entertained them well. Next morning after breakfast, Shaking Head said, You must give me a present for my services in warning you." "There's a pot of gold under my bed," said the giant. "Take all you want of it." "I don't want your gold," said Shaking Head, "but you have a gift which suits me well." "What is that?" asked the giant. "The two-handed black sword that never fails a blow." "You won't get that gift from me," said the giant, "and I can't spare it, for if a whole army were to come against me, as soon as I have my two hands on the hilt of that sword, I'll let no man near me without sweeping the head off him." "Well," said Shaking Head, "I have been keeping back your enemies this long time, but I'll let them at you now, and they'll raise up more. I'll put the whole kingdom of Erin against you." The giant stopped a moment and said, "I believe you'd do that if it served you." So he took the sword off his belt and handed it to his guest. Shaking Head gave it to the king's son, who mounted his seat, and they both went away. When they had gone some distance from the giant's castle, Shaking Head said to the king's son, "Where shall we eat tonight? You have more knowledge than I." "Indeed, then, I have not," said the king's son. "I have no knowledge at all of where we are going. It is you who have the knowledge." "Well," said Shaking Head, "we'll be at the third and youngest giant's castle tonight, and at first he'll treat us far worse and more harshly, but still we'll make this night's lodging of him, and a good gift in the morning." Soon after sunset they came to the castle, where they met the worst reception and the harshest they had found on the road. The giant was going to eat them both for supper, but when Shaking Head told him of the champions of Erin, he became as kind as two brothers, and gave good entertainment to both. Next morning after breakfast, Shaking Head asked for a present in return for his services. "Do you see the pot of gold in the corner there under my bed? Take all you want, and welcome," said the giant. "It's not gold I want," said Shaking Head, "but the cloak of darkness." "Oh," said the giant, "you'll not get that cloak of me, for I want it myself. If any man were to come against me, all I have to do would be putting on the cloak on my shoulders, and no one in the world would see me, or know where I'd be." "Well," said the Shaking Head, "it's long enough that I am keeping your enemies away, and if you do not give me that cloak now, I'll raise all the kingdom of Erin and still more forces to destroy you, and it's not long you'll last after they come." The giant thought a moment, and then said, "I believe you do what you say. There's the black cloak hanging on the wall before you. Take it." Shaking Head took the cloak, and the two men went away together, the king's son riding on the light black steed and having the double-handed sword at his back. When outside of the giant, Shaking Head put on the cloak and was not to be seen, and no other man could have been seen in his place. Then the king's son looked around and began to call and search for his man. He was lonely without him, and grieved not only to see him. Shaking Head, glad to see the affection of the king's son, took off the cloak and was at his side again. "Where are we going now?" asked the king's son. "We're going on a long journey to King Behind the Gold to ask his daughter of him." The two traveled on till they came to the castle of King Behind the Gold. Then Shaking Head said, "Go in you and ask his daughter of the king, and I'll stay here outside with the cloak on me." So he went in and spoke to the king, and the answer he got was this: "I am willing to give you my daughter, but you will not get her unless you do what she will ask of you. And I must tell you now that 300 kings' sons, lacking one, have come to ask for my daughter, and in the garden behind my castle are 300 iron spikes, and every spike of them but one is covered with the head of a king's son who could not do what my daughter wanted of him, and I'm greatly in dread that your own head will be put on the spike, and that is left uncovered." "Well," said the king's son, "I'll do my best to keep my head where it is at present." "Stay here in my castle," said the king, "and you'll have good entertainment till we know you can do what will be asked of you." At night, when the king's son was going to bed, the princess gave him a thimble and said, "Have this for me in the morning." He put the thimble on his finger, and she thought it could be easily taken away if he would sleep. So she came to him in the night with the drink and said, "I give you this in hopes I'll gain more drink by you." He swallowed the liquor, and the princess went away with the empty cup. Then the king's son put the thimble in his mouth between his cheek and his teeth for safekeeping, and was soon asleep. When the princess came to her own chamber, she struck her maid with a rod of enchantment and turned her into a rat. Then she made such a music of fifes and trumpets to sound throughout the castle that every soul in it fell asleep. That minute she sent the rat to where the king's son was sleeping, and the rat put her tail into the nostrils of the young man, tickled his nose so that he sneezed, and blew the thimble out of his mouth. The rat caught it and ran away to the princess, who struck her with the rod of enchantment and turned her into a maid again. Then the princess and the maid set out to the eastern world, taking the thimble with them. Shaking Head, who was watching with his cloak on, unseen by all, had seen everything, and now followed at their heels. And the eastern world at the seaside was a rock. The princess tapped it with her finger, and the rock opened. There was a great house inside, and in the house a giant. The princess greeted him and gave him the thimble, saying, "You are to keep this so no man can get it." "Oh," said the giant, taking the thimble and throwing it aside, "you need have no fear. No man can find me in this place." Shaking Head caught the thimble from the ground and put it in his pocket. When she had finished conversation with the giant, the princess kissed him and hurried away. Shaking Head followed her step by step till they came at break of day to the castle of King Behind the Gold. Shaking Head went to the king's son and asked, "Was anything given to you to keep last night?" "Yes, before I came to the chamber the princess gave me her thimble and told me to have it for her in the morning." "Have you it now?" asked Shaking Head. "It's not in my mouth where I put it last night. It's not even in the bed. I'm afraid my head is lost," said the king's son. "Well, look at this," said Shaking Head, taking the thimble out of his pocket and giving it to him. "The whole kingdom is moving today to see your death. All the people have heard that you are here asking for the princess, and they think your head will be on the last spike in the garden. Rise up now, mount your light black steed, ride to the summer house of the princess and her father, and give her the thimble." The king's son did as Shaking Head told him. When he gave up the thimble, the king said, "You have 1/3 of my daughter." But the princess was bitterly angry and vexed to the heart that any man on earth should know that she had dealings with a giant. She cared more for that than anything else. When the second day had passed, the king's son was going to bed. The princess gave him a comb to keep and said, "If you do not have this for me in the morning, your head will be on the spike that's left in my father's garden." The king's son took the comb with him, wrapped it in a handkerchief, and tied it to his head. In the night the princess came with a draught which she gave him, and soon he was asleep. Going back to her own chamber, she struck the maid with her rod of enchantment, and made a great yellow cat of her. Then she caused such music of fifes and trumpets to sound throughout the castle that every soul was in a deep sleep before the music was over, and at that moment she sent the cat to the chamber of the king's son. The cat worked the handkerchief off his head, took the comb, and ran it with the princess, who turned her into a maid again. The two set out for the eastern world straight away, but if they did, Shaking Head followed them in his cloak of darkness, till they came to the house of the giant in the great rock at the end of the road at the sea. The princess gave the giant the comb and said, "The thimble I gave you to keep last night was taken from you, for the king's son and Aaron brought it back to me this morning, and has done 1/3 of the work of winning me, and I did not expect you to serve me in this way." When the giant heard this, he was raging, and threw the comb into the sea behind him. Then, with druidic spells, he raised thunder and lightning and wind. The sea was roaring with storm and rain, but the comb had not touched the water when Shaking Head caught it. When her talk was over, the princess gave the giant a kiss, and home she went with the maid, but Shaking Head followed them step by step. In the morning, Shaking Head went to the king's son, roused him, and asked, "What was your task last night?" "The princess gave me a comb to have for her this morning," answered the king's son. "Where is it now?" asked Shaking Head. "Here on my head," said the king's son, putting up his hand to get it, but the comb was gone. "I'm done for now," said the king's son. "My head will be on the last spike today unless I have a comb for the princess." "Here it is for you," said Shaking Head, taking the comb out of his pocket. "And now," said he, "the whole kingdom is coming to this castle today to see your head put on the last spike in the garden, for all men think that the same thing will happen to you that has happened to every king's son before you. Go up on your steed and ride to the summer house where the king and his daughter are sitting, and give her the comb."